Hi everyone, welcome to week 4, and today I will be talking about chapter 16 um, of your St. Martin's Guide. The chapter is called Arguing, right? And then I will use one of the examples in chapter 6, um, one of the sample essays in chapter 6 to kind of walk you through um, what it's doing in terms of using techniques in arguing, right? Um, but before that, a couple of announcements, right? Um, for your second assignments, the response papers for a good man is hard to find. You did not get comments from me for that, right? I did not think it was necessary, and so I did not reply. But um, if you're worried that I didn't get it or whatever, um, eventually I will be sending, usually a week after or a couple of weeks after, I'll be sending people who have not submitted their assignments, right? And I will give them a chance to submit it, right? Because things happen, right? And yeah, so um, if you submit it, it's most likely that I got it and you got points for it. And if for some reason it got lost or whatever, I will be letting you know if you're missing an assignment, right? So you will have a way to make up for that later on. And if you're, again, I keep repeating this, but if you're having a hard time, coming up with ideas, coming up with structure or whatever, right? Just email me and I will meet with you. I have very reasonable flexibility, right? So I can meet with you immediately if you need to, or maybe the day after, or whatever, right? So you need to be in touch with me if you feel like you're not getting anything done, you don't feel confident, right, about writing this paper. You need to contact me immediately. Yeah, so I think that's all the announcements for now. All right, so chapter 16, arguing. So this chapter basically sort of breaks down for you, right, the structure, right, of arguments, right, like what do you need to do, right, in terms of structuring your paper when you're arguing for something, right, how an argument can be made sort of effective, right. So here we're going to talk about thesis, right? A thesis is very important. I'm going to be looking for a well-constructed thesis, right? And that will be, a substantial part of your grade. A well-constructed thesis that you will then be able to articulate throughout your paper, obviously. And we will talk about so there's a thesis and using reason and support and examples, right? How to use outside sources, how to use statistics, facts, and things like that. We will also be talking about responding to objections and alternatives, right? Acknowledging counter arguments, conceding, right? And refuting, right? And all of that. And then we will go through a little bit Daniel Solov's article, Why Privacy Matters Even If You Have Nothing to Hide, right? So we'll kind of break that down and what he's doing. All right, so thesis, right? So as indicated here, a thesis in a sentence or two, a thesis asserts or states the main point of any argument you want to make. It can be assertive only if you make it clear and direct, right? The thesis statement usually appears at the beginning of an argument essay, right? So I've said this before, your thesis should be the last couple of sentences of your introductory paragraph, right? That's where I'm going to be looking for it. And yeah, it has to be clear. It has to be sort of direct, and it has to summarize your argument, right? What is the issue? What are the two sides of the argument, right? And then which side are you sort of choosing to defend, right? Those sort of aspects, right, of your argument should be present, kind of, right, or indicated somehow in your thesis, right? Let's look at some examples here, right, on the thesis part. So there are different kinds of thesis, right? And for here they have examples of thesis for an arguing a position, right? And then there's a thesis for proposing a solution, which is our second paper, right? And then there's also a thesis for analyzing stories, right? I will only focus on those three because those are the only three papers that we will be writing about, right? But feel free to kind of read through all of these examples, right? So there's assertion of opinion, there's assertion of policy, assertion of evaluation, assertion of cause, right? Assertion of story analysis, right? So these are all different kinds of thesis based on what kind of thing you're arguing for, right? So look through this and kind of imitate them, right, in the way that you're going to structure your thesis. So obviously the first one, we've read this before, right? When overzealous parents and coaches impose adult standards in children's sports, the result can be activities that are neither satisfying nor beneficial, right? That's by Jessica Statsky. Children need to play, not compete, right? So I've talked about this in detail last week, so I will just kind of, kind of reiterate, right, how it's direct, because it talks about not just all parents and coaches, right, but overzealous. So they're making it specific here, right? Standards in children's sports, right? So it's not just about sports, but children's sports specifically, right? And her argument really is just is specific, right? Because she is only arguing that the result can be activities that are neither satisfying nor beneficial to children, right? So she's really just saying that there are sort of some harmful effects to this, right? It's not like all children's sports are bad, right? But there are some harmful effects to doing this, right? So it's very clear, it's very specific, and it's well qualified, right? Let's look at assertion of policy here. So this will be your second paper, right? What is your understanding of the problem, and what do you think should be done to solve it, right? So for the second paper, you will be asked to propose a solution, right? The first paper, it's just asking you to argue a position, right? So no solution is needed there, right? But for the second paper, you're supposed to give us a solution, right? So let's look at the example here. Although this last-minute anxiety about midterm and final exams is only too familiar to most college students, many professors may not realize how such major, infrequent, high-stakes exams work against the best interest of students, both psychologically and cognitively. If professors gave brief exams at frequent intervals, students would be spurred to learn more and worry less, right? So not only are we getting the two sides of the story, right, which is we're sort of getting a context, right, of that sort of fewer big exams, right, are actually like not beneficial for students, right? So we're getting that sort of argumentative part of the thesis, right? But then the last sentence, if professors gave brief exams at frequent intervals, right? So that is the solution part, right? So if you think about this, right, in terms of this essay, right, the first sentence really is a thesis for arguing a position, right? So there's a thesis for arguing a position, and then they added a solution, right? Which makes it become a paper about proposing a solution, right? So the solution is, brief or more exams, but sort of shorter exams, more but shorter, right? Instead of, like one big exam, on finals week, right? And then lastly, your third paper will be analyzing stories, right? So you'll be asked to analyze one of the two stories that we are reading for this class, right? All right, so the next section is giving reasons and support, right? So this section basically talks about, how to sort of defend your argument by using facts, statistics, right? Sort of reputable sources, how you're integrating your research, right, into your paper. And so this is, there's like several ways, right, to do this. And the first reason, right, is, or the first reason, the first way to kind of to provide reasons, right, and support is through examples, right? So as you probably notice with the sample essays, right, they're using facts, statistics and stuff like that, right? But they're also using examples, anecdotal examples, or personal examples, right, and things like that, or using their research, right, using outside sources to provide examples, right? So one of the examples here, right, and it's not just like using examples to provide an example, right? The use of examples there should be kind of like a purpose, right? Which means that use only examples that are directly sort of contributing or directly, strengthening, right, your argument. And also, or you can use, different, or you can sort of use the same, or I guess use different contexts, right, or use examples, right, from different contexts, right? I was having a hard time kind of explaining that, but let's look at the example here, right? So this is the example on illiteracy in America, right? So this is an excerpt from a book by Jonathan Kozol about illiteracy in America, right? And here he is providing different examples, right, of how illiteracy affect people, right? But he's sort of portioned these examples into three different types, right? So the examples, there are examples that are sort of about illiterate parents' sort of role in their children's education, right? And then there's also examples in sort of in healthcare, right? So let's read it. So illiterates cannot read the menu in a restaurant, right? They cannot read the cost of items on the menu in the window of the restaurant before they enter. Illiterates cannot read the letters that their children bring home from their teachers. They cannot study school department circulars that tell them of the courses that their children must be taking if they hope to pass SAT exams. They cannot help homework. They cannot write a letter to the teacher. They're afraid to visit the classroom. They do not want to humiliate their child or themselves. Illiterates cannot read instructions and bottle of prescription medicine. They cannot find out when a medicine is past the year of safe consumption, nor can they read of allergenic risks, warnings to diabetics, or the potential sedative effect of certain kinds of non-prescription pills. Right. So I'll stop there. So here he's giving examples, right, of the different ways that being illiterate, right, sort of disables you from, I guess, becoming an active part of society, right? But also that there are actually kind of sort of there's health risks, right? So it's not just sort of like out of embarrassment, right? Or but there's sort of like real world kind of long-term effect, right? If one is not able to sort of participate in sort of everyday life, right? Or everyday kind of like social life, right? So not being able to help their children's education, right? Is it detriment to their children's sort of like long-term educational future, right? And then there's also the fact, right, that they could put their health at risk if they're not able to sort of read prescription medicines, right, and sort of basic instructions of how to consume medications and things like this, right? So I think I've not read his book, but it seems to me that what this argument, right, is about is to sort of address, right, the stakes, right, of literacy, right? What are the negative effects, right, if we do not sort of campaign, right, or improve literacy, right, in America? So these are his examples for that. So the examples, right, can be taken from different contexts, right? Right, and then the next one is using up-to-date and relevant and accurate statistics, right? So statistics, right, is important, especially if your subject has to deal with like economics, right? Which everything seems, we live in a capitalist society, so everything has to do with economics, right? It's not just about health, but what are the economic sort of benefits, right? That's always kind of, how everything is sort of phrased in America as an argument, right? So it's not just moral to do something, but it's also economically sound, right? Which is a problem, but I don't have the time to explain to you why that is. But yeah, anyway, a lot of the arguments, right, especially political arguments about something, it always has to do with economic benefits and so on and so forth, right? And so when you're talking about economics, right, it seems that numbers always come up, right? 50% of people say that blah blah blah, or 7% of something. So that would be if your argument has something to do with economics or something statistical, right? Then you would really want to use statistics, accurate statistics, right? Um, and sort of like relevant numbers that sort of make your or back up, right, your argument. So yeah, so read the examples here. You need to provide the numbers, and also you need to provide where you're getting, cite the sources, right? So let's see here. Yeah, so you can either mention, right, mention where you're getting it from. You can say, for example, right, a research from UCR physics department, right, says that 75% of blah blah blah, right? Or you can just put your citation in the in-text citation. All right, so the next section is responding to objections and alternatives, right? To respond to objections and alternatives, writers rely on three basic strategies: acknowledging, conceding, and refuting. Writers show that they are aware of readers' objections and questions, modify their position to accept those concerns they think are legitimate, or explicitly argue that readers' objections may be invalid or that their concerns may be irrelevant. Right? Writers may use one or more of these three strategies in the same essay. Right. So yeah. So there's three different ways, right, of objecting or responding to alternatives, right? As I keep mentioning, right, your purpose of arguing, right, is not to say that your argument is perfect or that it's absolute or it's the only good answer, right, or is the only good argument, right? You're just providing one perspective, right? And which means that there are other arguments out there that might be as good as yours, right, or might be better than yours, right? Or but there are also arguments that maybe but that you think may be less credible than yours, right? So you want to identify at least one or two of these kind of alternative or counter arguments, right? Because that will kind of add complexity and depth to your paper, right? If you're just saying, if you're not sort of acknowledging other or alternative or counter arguments, right? You're sort of isolating your argument, right? And it sort of, I guess it's just better to sort of to let your readers know that you are actually thinking about or that you've done your research and that you know that there are other arguments out there, right? And so you just want to acknowledge one or two, right? So there's three ways, right, to do that. And one is acknowledging it, right? And sometimes you just need to acknowledge, oh, like this, and you don't have to like address it or you don't have to argue against it, right? You just have to acknowledge that some people are thinking about it in this way that's slightly different from mine, right? But it doesn't affect your argument because they are sort of arguing for something a little bit different, right? And then the second way, right, is to concede, right, which means to say that there is an argument out there, that might be a little better than mine, right? But again, it still doesn't discredit my argument because my argument is slightly different, right? But you're just saying that, yes, this is actually a very good argument, right? And um, but again, right? It should not sort of you're acknowledging it, and you're also saying that um, this is a good argument, right? That you're not sort of like willing to sort of um, interact with, right? Because that's not what you're trying to do, right? Um, and then there's a refutation, right? Which means you're refuting or you're arguing against that objection, right? So if there is an objection out there that you think is actually not a good point of view, or you think that your argument is sort of um, discrediting, right? And so you want to mention that. You're saying that, yes, some people say X, Y, and Z about this argument, but in fact, based on what I've observed and based on what I've argued, they are actually wrong, right? Or they actually sort of misrepresent X, Y, and Z, right? Or something like that. So that's refutation, where you're directly sort of discrediting or directly going against other people's objections, right? So you don't have to use all three, right? You can just choose one, right? Or maybe two, but you can use three if you want to. It's just that the paper is not long enough, right, to have to deal with a lot of things, right? So I suggest just choosing one or two sort of objections out there, right, and then address them in your paper. Yeah. And I will discuss this further as I talk about the sample essay. So now let's talk about the sample essay. The sample essay is in Chapter 6. Let me look at it. All right, so go back to Chapter 6 and then open the essay called Why Privacy Matters Even If You Have Nothing to Hide, right, by Daniel Solove. Right, so basically Solove is arguing against this mentality, right, that a lot of people, I think, feel, right, that they don't really care too much about being spied on or being sort of although, you know, I also see a lot of students, a lot of people who own, you know, computers and iPads and things like that, where they cover, right, the camera so that, you know, no one can kind of hijack their computer and look into sort of or look at them, right, through their computer or phone's cameras. And so, you know, so a lot of people are worried about privacy, but there are also a lot of people who just don't care, right? Because for them, you know, I have nothing to hide, I'm not doing anything illegal, whatever that means. And so, you know, I don't care, right? So some people actually think like this. And so Solove is arguing against that mentality, right? He's arguing that even if you have nothing to hide, right? I mean, I feel like we all have something to hide, but even if you feel like you have nothing to hide, right, you should still be concerned with your privacy, right, being invaded by the government, by corporations, by, you know, big companies, tech companies, and so on and so forth. Right, you should still be concerned because X, Y, and Z. So that's what he's arguing about, right? For people not to be too lenient with the mentality that, you know, I don't care about privacy because I have nothing to hide, right? So let's read his the introduction here, right? So this is the first paragraph. And if you notice on the right-hand side of the essay, there are numbers, right? So that those are paragraph numbers, just in case you haven't figured that yet. And it's a good way to kind of follow, yeah, because I will be saying, oh, let's look at paragraph 6, paragraph 7. And all you have to do is look on the right, and that's where the paragraph number is. All right, so when the government gathers or analyzes personal information, many people say they're not worried. I've got nothing to hide, they declare. Only if you're doing something wrong should you worry, and then you don't deserve to keep it private. Right? The nothing to hide argument pervades discussions about privacy. The data security expert Bruce Schneier calls it the most common retort against privacy advocates. The legal scholar Jeffrey Stone refers to it as an all too common refrain. In its most compelling form, it is an argument that the privacy interest is generally minimal, thus making the contest with security concerns a foreordained victory for security. Right, so here, right, in the opening, he's sort of enumerating, right, the different ways that people have sort of voiced their opinion about not caring about their privacy, right, because, as they say, they have nothing to hide, right? So he is sort of structuring the introduction as kind of narrating, right, the other side of the argument, right, what he will then be arguing against, right? So he's kind of talking about this is what people are saying, right, and then he will be eventually arguing against that, right? So that's a good way, I think, to open your paper as a way of introduction, right, is to kind of frame your introduction, right, based on the argument of the other side that you will be arguing against, right? Because then that will give your reader, right, a better kind of background on what your argument is going to be against, right? And so his thesis here is on the last sentence, right, of this paragraph. In its most compelling form, it is an argument that the privacy interest is generally minimal, thus making the contest with security concerns a foreordained victory for security, right? Right, so because a lot of people, right, think that it is a kind of like a simple it's a simple reason, right, to say that if you have nothing to hide, screw privacy, right? Since people think that, right, the government, right, or whomever sort of invades your privacy, then have a good argument, right, for saying that they can do X, Y, and Z with your privacy because they've convinced a lot of people that it's actually not invasive, right? So this is kind of what Solove is arguing for, right? That or arguing against, right? That simplifying this idea of invasion of privacy, simplifying it to this catchphrase that I have nothing to hide, right, actually gives whoever is invading your privacy, right, uh, not just legitimacy, right, but kind of um, giving them a way, right, to justify whatever they do, right, when they're invading your privacy. So that's kind of what his argument is, right? To be honest, I think the thesis um, could have been clearer, right? It could have been a little longer, but that's his thesis, and um, yeah, yeah. I think it could have been kind of extended a little bit more, um, but that's how he's sort of like framing his argument. All right, let's read paragraph 2. The nothing to hide argument is everywhere. In Britain, for example, the government has installed millions of public surveillance cameras in cities and towns, which are watched by officials via closed circuit television. In a campaign slogan for the program, the government declares, "If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear." Variations of nothing to hide arguments frequently appear in blogs, letters to the editor, television news, interviews, and other forums. One blogger in the United States, in reference to profiling people for national security purposes, declares, "I don't mind people wanting to find out things about me. I've got nothing to hide, which is why I support efforts to find terrorists by monitoring our phone calls." Right, so here he is giving us an example, right? Um, but also giving us more examples of what sort of um, what people say, right, about this nothing to hide um, argument. But he's also connecting it, right, to the fact about how it's been this idea of privacy, right, and the government's ability to pry on your privacy for sort of security purposes, right, or for I don't know, national interest or whatever, right? And so those actually come hand in hand, right? So the national interest, right, um, sort of uses, right, this rhetoric of "you have nothing to hide," right, in order to justify invasion of privacy, right? So the government would say that um, we need to collect data, right? Because for security purposes, right? But you should feel safe in the fact that if you are not a criminal or you are not, some terrorist or whatever, right? That you will be fine, right? So um, national security, right, um, has also fed right into this idea of nothing to hide, right? In order for them to um, to have more access, right, to people, right? So connecting those two, right? And then paragraph 3, I think this is where he sort of builds his argument, right? On the surface, it seems easy to dismiss the nothing to hide argument. Everybody probably has something to hide from somebody, right? As Alexander um, Solzhenitsyn declared, "Everything is guilty of something or has something to conceal. All one has to do is look hard enough to find what it is." One can usually think of something that even the most open person would want to hide. As a commentator to my blog post noted, "If you have nothing to hide, then that quite literally means you are willing to let me photograph you naked, and I get full rights to that photograph, so I can show it to your neighbors." Um, right. So So here he's starting to build his argument, right? He's the first what? The first two paragraphs. Oh my God, I just lost it. So the first two paragraphs pretty much focused on the other side, right? The side that he will be arguing against. And then the third paragraph, he then starts to say, or he then starts to sort of talk about his argument, his position, right? That in fact, this is the logic, right? This is the logic that my argument is taking, right? But also notice on paragraph 2 and 3 how he uses outside sources, right? So in a campaign slogan for the program, the government declares, and then he puts a column there, and then the quotation, right? So I want to see this, like using quotation, using your outside sources, right? As Alexander Solzhenitsyn declared, and then the quote, right? So I want to see all of these quotations, right, throughout your paper, because again, the quotation is your evidence, right? Evidence of your research. All right, now I want to jump to paragraph 11. So paragraph 11, I'm going to read it. One such harm. So here he's giving a lot of examples, right? But this is one example on paragraph 11. One such harm, for example, which I call aggregation, emerges from the fusion of small bits of seemingly innocuous data. When combined, the information becomes much more telling. By joining pieces of information we might not take pains to guard, the government can glean information about us that we might indeed wish to conceal. For example, suppose you bought a book about cancer. This purchase isn't very revealing on its own, for it indicates just an interest in the disease. Suppose you bought a wig. The purchase of a wig by itself could be for a number of reasons, but combine those two pieces of information, and now the inference can be made that you have cancer and are undergoing chemotherapy. That might be a fact you wouldn't mind sharing, but you'd certainly want to have the choice, right? So he's saying here, right, that the sort of like the little bits and pieces of information, right, that you allow, companies, the government, right, to have access, even if they seem simple or kind of, they're not they're unimportant, right, information. He's saying here, right, that someone could sort of put some pieces together, right, and then kind of suggest that you are this or you are that because X, Y, and Z, right? So he's saying that all these like little things that make us feel like we have nothing to hide, right, could actually be used against us, right? Even if it may be true or not, right, but could be sort of put together to kind of to make a narrative about us, right? That might be, very bad for us, right? So that's him sort of providing, right, examples on how this might happen. Another potential problem with the government's harvest of personal data is one I call exclusion. Exclusion occurs when people are prevented from having knowledge about how information about them is being used, and when they are barred from accessing and correcting errors in that data. Many government national security measures involve maintaining a huge database of information that individuals cannot access. Indeed, because they involve national security, the very existence of these programs is often kept secret. This kind of information processing, which blocks subjects' knowledge and involvement is a kind of due process problem. It is a structural problem involving the way people are treated by government institutions and creating a power imbalance between people and the government. To what extent should government officials have such a significant power over citizens? This issue isn't about what information people want to hide, but about the power and the structure of the government. Right, so another example, right, but instead of like the last example, I'm on paragraph 12, by the way. So the last example, right, had to do with how the government or someone, right, can put sort of pieces of information together and suggest something about you, right. Now we have another example, but this one has more to do with how much sort of power, right, the government actually accumulates by taking in personal information from its citizens, right? And so this is sort of it's another example, but it's a different layer, right? It's another sort of context for arguing against this kind of invasion of privacy, right? So yeah, so these are just kind of it's really important, right, that you read these examples, right, and kind of figure out what they're doing and how they're using examples, how they're citing their sources, how they're incorporating quotations, right, how they're writing their thesis, because this is kind of what I will be looking for when I'm grading your paper, right? So yeah, so I hope this lecture was, useful to you. And again, if you have any, questions or concerns about anything, I'm just an email away. All right, I think that's it for now. And again, I will be sending you a copy of my notes if you want to follow using my notes. But yeah, that's it.